It stands at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, white columns gleaming against the Washington sky, the most photographed house in America, the most powerful address on earth. But the White House you see today bears almost no resemblance to what it once was. The building has been burned to its foundation, gutted completely to bare walls, rebuilt from the inside out with steel and concrete, transformed into a fortress with underground bunkers that stretch deeper than most people realize. This is the story of how a simple Georgian mansion became the command center of the world's most powerful nation. How enslaved workers built it with their hands. How British soldiers tried to destroy it. How it nearly collapsed from within. And how it was secretly transformed into something far more than just a house. The White House didn't become powerful by accident. It became powerful through fire, reconstruction, and transformation. Through decisions made in times of war. Through secrets buried beneath its floors. This is how it happened. If you're interested in the hidden history of America's most famous buildings, subscribe to the channel. We're uncovering the stories behind the mansions that shaped a nation. Let's begin where it all started, with an Irish architect, a president who never lived there, and the workers whose names were never meant to be remembered. Chapter 1: Building the President's House. The year was 1792. The United States of America was barely 15 years old, and its leaders faced a problem that had nothing to do with foreign enemies or political disputes. They needed a house for the president, a permanent residence in a new capital city that didn't yet exist. Pierre-Charles L'Enfant had drawn up ambitious plans for Washington, grand avenues radiating from central points, public buildings positioned to inspire awe. But L'Enfant's ego proved as large as his vision, and by early 1792, he was dismissed. President George Washington took personal control of the project. He wanted this residence built correctly, a structure that would represent the young nation without appearing monarchical, elegant but republican, substantial but not extravagant. Washington announced a design competition in March 1792. The prize, $500 and a lot in the new capital. 9 architects submitted proposals. Most were mediocre, some were outright terrible, but one caught Washington's attention immediately. The design came from James Hoban, an Irish-born architect working in Charleston, South Carolina. Washington had met Hoban the previous year during a tour through the southern states. The president admired a courthouse Hoban had designed in Charleston. The structure showed sophisticated understanding of Georgian architecture, clean lines, proper proportions. Exactly what Washington envisioned. Hoban's design for the president's house drew inspiration from Leinster House in Dublin, a mansion Hoban knew well from his training at the Dublin Society of Arts. The facade featured a triangular pediment supported by 4 round columns, 3 windows beneath the pediment, 4 windows on each side, alternating between triangular and rounded crowns, 2 chimneys, 1 on each side. Washington summoned Hoban to Philadelphia in June 1792. The president reviewed the design personally, made modifications. The original plan called for 3 stories. Washington insisted on 2. The residence needed stone facing, not brick. These changes would make construction faster and less expensive. On July 16, 1792, Washington selected Hoban's submission as the winner. The decision took less than an hour, but winning the competition was the easy part. Actually constructing the mansion would prove far more difficult. The site sat in a sparsely populated region between Maryland and Virginia, both slave states. The location would matter more than anyone initially realized. Hoban drew up plans immediately. He estimated the work would take 8 years. He needed skilled carpenters, stonemasons, bricklayers, plasterers. He needed common laborers to clear land, dig foundations, haul materials. The commissioners overseeing the capital's construction tried recruiting workers from Europe. They advertised in newspapers. They offered competitive wages. The response was dismal. European craftsmen had no interest in traveling to a swampy wilderness to erect a city that existed only on paper. So the commissioners turned to a labor source close at hand: enslaved African Americans. The cornerstone was laid on October 13, 1792. Work began immediately, and from that first day, enslaved people formed the backbone of the labor force. Slave owners in Maryland and Virginia hired out their human property to the federal commissioners. The arrangement was simple and brutal. The government paid the slaveholder between $5 and $8 per month for each worker. The enslaved person received nothing. Every penny went to the master. The names appear in payroll records at the National Archives. Ben, Peter, Harry, Daniel. These men were listed as owned by James Hoban himself. The architect who designed the president's house also enslaved the men who constructed it. Other names surface in the documents. Jacob, owned by George Fenwick. Gerald, Tony, and Jack, hired out by Edmund Plowden. Charles, Davy, Gabriel, Henry, and Nance, provided by the Brent sisters of Maryland. These laborers did far more than simple manual work. Enslaved men quarried sandstone at Aquia Creek in Virginia. They cut the rough stone that Scottish masons later dressed and laid into walls. They worked as carpenters, sawyers, and brickmakers. They hauled materials across miles of rough terrain using carts and their own backs. The commissioners erected small wooden huts on the construction site to house the workforce. Unpainted structures lined up 20 feet apart. Each enslaved person received 2 meals daily, cornmeal and either pork or beef. Their masters were required to provide clothing and 1 blanket. Basic medical care came from the commission. The work was backbreaking. Dawn to dusk, 6 days a week. Cutting stone in summer heat, mixing mortar in winter cold, hauling timbers, laying brick, creating the residence that would become the symbol of American democracy. The irony was not lost on everyone. Some observers noted the contradiction even then. A mansion dedicated to liberty, constructed by people who had none. But the project continued. The walls rose slowly. First floor complete by 1795. Second floor taking shape by 1796. The roof going on by 1797. Scottish stonemasons carved decorative elements, the high-relief rose and garland above the north entrance, the fish-scale pattern beneath the window pediments. European craftsmen handled the most intricate work. But enslaved laborers provided the foundation for everything. Literally. More than 200 documented enslaved men worked on the president's house. The actual number was likely higher. Many went unrecorded, their labor considered unremarkable, their names unimportant. George Washington visited the site repeatedly. He examined the stonework, he checked the progress, he discussed details with Hoban, but Washington never lived in the residence he helped create. His presidency ended in March 1799, with construction still incomplete. John Adams became the first president to occupy the mansion. He moved in during early November 1800. The place was barely habitable, plaster still wet on many walls, only 6 rooms fully furnished. The grand staircase unfinished, but it was ready enough. Abigail Adams hung laundry in the unfinished east room. She complained about the cold, the dampness, the isolation. The structure sat in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by construction debris and mud. But the president's house stood. Aquia Creek sandstone walls, slate roof, elegant proportions, exactly as Hoban designed it. The mansion had taken 8 years to complete. It cost over $200,000, and it was constructed primarily by people who would never be free, never be paid, never be remembered. Their hands shaped every stone, their labor raised every wall, their sweat mixed into the mortar. But history would forget them for the next 200 years. The residence was complete, and already it was changing what it meant to be president. Already it was becoming more than just a place to live. It was becoming a symbol, a statement, the beginning of something that would grow far beyond what anyone in 1800 could imagine. Chapter 2. The British Burn It Down. 14 years. That's how long the president's house stood intact. Then, on a hot August evening in 1814, enemy soldiers set it on fire and watched it burn. The War of 1812 had been grinding on for 2 years. Americans called it the Second War of Independence. The opposition considered it a minor theater in their larger conflict with Napoleon. Either way, by the summer of 1814, Forces from across the Atlantic had decided to teach the upstart Americans a lesson they wouldn't forget. Vice Admiral George Cockburn and Major General Robert Ross commanded 4,500 battle-hardened troops. These weren't colonial militia. These were veterans of the Peninsular War, professional soldiers who had fought the French across Spain and Portugal. Their target, Washington, the American capital. The strategic logic was simple: capture the capital, humiliate the government, force favorable peace terms. But there was also an element of revenge. Americans had burned York, the capital of Upper Canada, in April 1813. King George's forces had not forgotten. On August 24, 1814, the invading army met American defenders at Bladensburg, Maryland, just outside Washington. The battle lasted barely 2 hours. American militia broke and ran. The road to the capital lay open. President James Madison had ridden out to observe the battle. When he saw his forces collapsing, he turned his horse and raced back to Washington ahead of the advancing enemy. The President of the United States was fleeing his own capital. At the President's house, First Lady Dolly Madison faced a decision. Her husband had left her with instructions to save important state papers. But the enemy was coming. She had perhaps an hour, maybe less. Dolly Madison made her choice. She would save what she could. The state papers went first. Cabinet documents, important letters, everything portable. Then she turned to the dining room. A meal sat prepared on the table. The president had expected to return for dinner. Instead, officers from London would eat it. But there was one more item: the full-length portrait of George Washington by Gilbert Stuart. It hung in the state dining room, 7 feet tall, the image of the first president, the man who had overseen construction of this very residence. The portrait was screwed to the wall. Madison's servants couldn't remove it quickly, so they broke the frame. They cut the canvas from its stretcher. They rolled it carefully and carried it away. Dolly Madison fled the president's house at 3 in the afternoon. She crossed the Potomac into Virginia. Behind her, the city emptied. Residents grabbed what they could carry and ran. The enemy entered Washington at 8 in the evening. Ross and Cockburn rode at the head of the column. They met no resistance. The city was abandoned. The commanders made their way to the president's house. The front door stood open. Inside, they found the dining table still set, dinner still warm, wine poured into glasses. According to reports, the officers actually sat down and ate the meal. They drank the wine. They toasted King George. They made jokes about President Madison's hasty departure. Then they got to work. Cockburn wanted to burn the entire city, every building, every structure, a message written in ash and ruins. But Ross overruled him. They would torch only government buildings, public structures, leave private property alone. The president's house was first on the list. Soldiers piled furniture in the center of each room. Chairs, tables, desks, anything that would burn. They broke windows to create draft. They poured gunpowder as accelerant. Then they lit the flames. The destruction spread quickly. Curtains ignited. Wallpaper caught. Wooden floors burned. The interior of the president's house became an inferno. Outside, residents who hadn't fled watched the blaze light up the night sky. The symbol of their young nation was burning. The enemy was destroying it methodically, room by room. But the exterior walls held. Hobon's Aquia Creek sandstone couldn't burn. The stone blackened. The mortar cracked. But the walls stood. By midnight, the interior was completely destroyed. Floors collapsed into the basement. The roof caved in. Only the stone shell remained, charred and hollow. Ross's forces moved on. The Capitol was next. Then the Treasury Building. Then the Navy Yard. By dawn, the federal city was in ruins. But the invaders didn't stay long. Ross knew better than to occupy a hostile city with limited troops. His mission was destruction, not conquest. On August 25th, less than 24 hours after entering Washington, the army withdrew. They left behind a devastated capital. The president's house was a burned-out shell. The capital lay in ruins. The government had fled. The humiliation was complete. James Madison returned to Washington on August 27th. He surveyed the damage. The residence he had lived in for 3 years was gone. Everything inside destroyed. Only the blackened walls remained standing. The question now was simple: rebuild or abandon? Some voices in Congress argued for moving the capital, perhaps back to Philadelphia, maybe to a more defensible location. The burned buildings were a national embarrassment. Why not start fresh somewhere else? But others insisted Washington must remain the capital. To abandon it now would hand the enemy a permanent victory. It would prove that the Americans couldn't defend their own seat of government. Madison sided with those who wanted to stay. The capital would remain in Washington, and the president's house would be rebuilt. The man they called to do it was the same man who constructed it the first time. James Hoban returned to the ruins of his creation. He was 56 years old now, but the mansion was his design, his work. If anyone could bring it back from the ashes, Hoban could. In October 1814, just 2 months after the attack, Congress appropriated funds for reconstruction. Not enough funds, as it turned out, but enough to begin. Hoban surveyed the damage carefully. The exterior walls had survived, blackened and cracked, but structurally sound. That was fortunate. Constructing new walls would have taken years. Instead, he could work with what remained. The decision was made. They would keep the exterior walls, clean them, repair them, paint them white to cover the burn marks, and rebuild everything inside from scratch. The president's house had survived its first death. Now it would rise again, stone by stone, wall by wall. But it would take 3 more years before a president could live there again. 3 years of reconstruction. 3 years of waiting to prove that the enemy couldn't break them. The flames were out, but the transformation had just begun. Chapter 3. Rising from the Ashes. James Hoban stood in front of the ruins and calculated what could be saved. The exterior walls were blackened. Mortar had cracked from the intense heat. Window frames were gone. The roof had collapsed completely. But the Aquia Creek sandstone had done its job. The walls were still standing. That meant something. It meant they could rebuild without starting from bare ground. It meant the president's house could rise again in years instead of decades. But first, they had to clean up the wreckage. Congress had appropriated funds in October 1814, just 2 months after the burning. The amount was insufficient. Everyone knew it. But it was enough to begin. Enough to show that America would not abandon its capital. Hoban assembled his crew in early 1815. Some were the same workers who had built the original structure, stonemasons who knew every wall, carpenters who had framed the first floors. They returned to finish what the enemy had tried to destroy. The work began with removal. Debris filled every room: charred timbers, collapsed plaster, burned furniture, broken glass. Everything had to be hauled out before reconstruction could start. Workers cleared the interior for months. They carried blackened remains out through empty window frames. They shoveled ash. They salvaged what little could be reused. Mostly, they cleared space for what would come next. Benjamin Henry Latrobe joined the project as consulting architect. Latrobe had worked on the Capitol before the war. He brought sophisticated understanding of neoclassical design. Hoban appreciated the help, though he remained in charge of the overall work. The 2 architects assessed the damage together. They agreed on the approach. Keep the exterior walls, repair and strengthen them, paint them white to cover the fire damage, then rebuild the interior completely. The painting decision created the name that would stick forever. Before 1814, people simply called it the President's House or the Executive Mansion. After the reconstruction, when workers painted the sandstone walls brilliant white to hide the burn marks, it became the White House. The name was unofficial at first, but it spread quickly. By 1820, almost everyone called it the White House. Reconstruction moved faster than original construction. The foundation existed. The walls stood. The basic structure was there. Workers focused on interior carpentry, plastering, and finish work. New floor joists went in first, stronger than the originals. Hoban had learned from the fire. If it happened again, he wanted floors that wouldn't collapse so easily into the basement. The roof came next. A new slate roof, properly supported. Workers installed it carefully through 1815 and into 1816. Getting the roof on was critical. It protected everything below from weather damage. With the building weatherproofed, interior work accelerated. Plasterers moved from room to room. Carpenters installed trim and moldings. Painters followed behind them. The staterooms on the first floor received priority. The president needed spaces for official functions. The East Room was rebuilt larger than before. Hoban expanded it slightly, taking advantage of the reconstruction to improve the layout. The room would host receptions for hundreds of guests. It needed the space. The Oval Room on the south side became the Blue Room. Latrobe suggested the elliptical shape for this formal parlor. The curve created an elegant space for greeting diplomatic visitors. It would become one of the most photographed rooms in the mansion. The state dining room went in on the northwest corner. Large enough for official dinners, but not ostentatiously oversized. Republican simplicity still mattered, even after the humiliation of 1814. Upstairs, the private quarters took shape, bedrooms for the first family, guest rooms, service spaces, everything a president would need for daily life. The work continued through 1816 and into 1817. Hoban pushed the crews. President Madison wanted the residence ready. The government needed its symbol restored. By summer 1817, enough rooms were finished that occupancy became possible. Not comfortable yet. Not complete, but habitable. President Madison chose not to wait for his successor. He could have moved back in during his final months in office. Instead, he left the honor to James Monroe, who would take office in March 1817. Monroe moved into the partially reconstructed White House in October 1817, 3 years and 2 months after the burning. The timeline was remarkable. Hoban and his crew had accomplished in 3 years what originally took 8, but the work wasn't finished. Monroe lived amid ongoing construction. Plasterers worked in unfinished rooms. Painters climbed scaffolds. Carpenters installed trim. The president conducted business while workers rebuilt around him. The reconstruction would continue for another year. Final details, decorative elements, furnishings, all the touches that transformed a building into a proper executive residence. Hoban added one more significant change in 1824, the south portico, a semicircular porch with curved stairs leading up to the south entrance. Hoban had proposed porticos before the fire. Now, during the Monroe administration, he finally got approval to build the southern one. The south portico changed the building's appearance dramatically. It gave the mansion a grand entrance on the garden side. The curved stairs and columned porch created the iconic image that would appear in countless photographs. 5 years later, in 1829, Hoban added the north portico. President Andrew Jackson approved this addition. The northern entrance now matched the southern one in grandeur. Columns supported a pediment. The entrance proclaimed dignity and permanence. These porticos completed Hoban's vision. He had designed them before 1814 but never got the chance to build them. The British, ironically, had created the opportunity. The reconstruction allowed improvements that might never have happened otherwise. By 1830, the president's house stood fully restored and enhanced, stronger than the original, more refined. The scars of 1814 were completely hidden beneath white paint and elegant additions. Hoban was 70 years old. He had built this mansion twice, once from bare ground, once from smoking ruins. Both times he had created something that endured. He would live only one more year. James Hoban died in December 1831. He was buried in Washington, in the city he helped build. His house stood as his monument. The reconstruction had cost approximately $500,000, far more than the original construction. But the nation considered it money well spent. To abandon the capital after the burning would have been surrender. To rebuild it was defiance. The president's house had survived fire and war. It had been reconstructed stronger than before. and it was beginning to accumulate the power that would eventually make it the most important address in the world, but even Hoban couldn't have imagined what would come next. Couldn't have known that in just over a century, his mansion would be gutted again. Not by enemy soldiers this time, but by the American government itself. The building that rose from British flames would one day be stripped to its bones and rebuilt from the inside, transformed into something Hoban never designed, something far beyond a Georgian mansion. That transformation was coming. But first, the president's house would stand as Hoban left it for more than 100 years. White walls gleaming, porticos proclaiming strength, a symbol of resilience. It had risen from the ashes once. Soon it would be reborn again. Chapter 4. The Complete Gutting. Truman's transformation begins. Margaret Truman was playing the piano when the leg broke through the floor. February 1948. The president's daughter was practicing in her second-floor sitting room. The Steinway grand piano was a family treasure. Margaret played often. Then the floor gave way. Not completely. The piano didn't crash through to the room below, but the leg punched through the floorboards. Wood splintered. The piano lurched. Margaret stopped playing immediately. Engineers came to inspect. What they found was worse than anyone imagined. The White House was collapsing. Not from enemy attack this time. Not from fire or war. The building was falling apart from age, neglect, and the simple fact that it had never been properly engineered in the first place. The structure was 148 years old. It had been built quickly in the 1790s with 18th century techniques. Wooden beams supporting stone walls. No steel reinforcement. No modern load calculations. Just timber and masonry and hope that it would hold. It hadn't held. Engineers discovered cracks throughout the building. Major structural beams had rotted. Others had sagged dangerously. The entire floor system was unstable. Walls were pulling away from their supports. The mansion was literally coming apart. President Harry Truman received the assessment in March 1948. The news was unambiguous. The White House was structurally unsound, dangerous to occupy. It could collapse at any time. Truman had three options: tear it down and build new, abandon it and move the government elsewhere, or gut it completely and rebuild from the inside. The first option was politically impossible. Destroy the White House, the symbol of American democracy, the building that had survived British torches? Unthinkable. The second option was equally impossible. Move the president to a different residence? Abandon 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue? That would be surrender to entropy. That left the third option. Strip the building to its stone walls. Remove everything inside. Rebuild with modern engineering. Turn Hoban's Georgian mansion into a 20th century structure disguised as an 18th century one. Truman made the decision quickly. They would gut the White House completely, excavate beneath it, install a steel framework, make it strong enough to stand for another 200 years. The project would take years, cost millions, require moving the president and his family out of the building entirely. In December 1948, the Truman family packed their belongings and moved across the street to Blair House, a smaller mansion that would serve as the temporary executive residence. They expected to be there for 2 years. They would stay for 3. The gutting began in December 1948. Workers started carefully. This wasn't demolition, this was surgery. They needed to save the exterior walls while removing everything inside. Crews photographed every room, documented every architectural detail, numbered each piece of woodwork. The goal was to rebuild the interior exactly as it had been, at least in appearance. Then they started tearing it out. The staterooms went first. Workers removed the elaborate plasterwork from the east room. They took down the crystal chandeliers. They pulled up the floors. Everything portable was cataloged and stored. Room by room, floor by floor, they stripped the White House to its bones. By spring 1949, the interior was completely empty. Workers stood inside a hollow stone shell. You could see straight from the basement to the sky. The roof was gone. The floors were gone. Only the exterior walls remained. Photographs from this period are startling. The White House looks bombed, gutted, dead. Just walls standing around empty space. Engineers surveyed the foundation next. What they found was troubling. The original foundation was shallow, inadequate for the weight it carried. If they were rebuilding anyway, they should dig deeper, so they dug. Excavation began beneath the White House in summer 1949. Workers removed earth from under the existing foundation. They dug down, created space for additional levels underground. This was when they built the expanded bunker system. The Presidential Emergency Operations Center that existed before 1949 was limited, small, built hastily during World War II as a temporary measure. Now, with the entire building gutted and excavation underway, they had the opportunity to create something permanent, something substantial, an underground command center that could function during nuclear war. The excavation went deep. Exactly how deep remains classified. But the bunker system built during this renovation was far more extensive than anything that existed before. Steel vault doors went in, communications equipment, ventilation systems designed to filter radioactive fallout. The Cold War had begun. Nuclear weapons existed. The president needed a place to survive and command if the unthinkable happened. While workers dug beneath the White House, other crews prepared for the steel framework that would replace the old wooden structure. Engineers designed a steel skeleton to fit inside the stone walls. This framework would actually support the building. The exterior walls would remain for appearance, but they would no longer be load-bearing. The steel would carry the weight. It was revolutionary, taking a Georgian mansion and retrofitting it with modern structural engineering, preserving the exterior while completely changing how the building actually stood. The steel arrived in late 1949, massive beams, I-beams and columns and cross-bracing, enough steel to build a skyscraper, but configured to fit inside the White House footprint. Installation began in January 1950. Workers erected the steel frame floor by floor. The framework rose inside the hollow stone shell, modern engineering hidden behind historic walls. The contrast was stark. 18th century sandstone on the outside, 20th century steel on the inside. The White House was becoming a hybrid. Historic facade, modern structure. By summer 1950, the steel framework was complete. The building had a new skeleton, stronger than anything Hoban could have imagined, strong enough to support additions, strong enough to last centuries. Now came the work of rebuilding everything that had been removed. But this time, it would be different. This time, they would build for a nuclear age, for a world where the president might need to survive underground for days, for threats Hoban never conceived. The White House Truman's family would return to would look the same on the surface. The rooms would be recreated, the moldings restored, the chandeliers rehung. But beneath the familiar appearance, everything would be different. Steel instead of wood, concrete instead of timber, bunkers instead of basements. The transformation wasn't just renovation, it was metamorphosis. The president's house was dying. What would emerge from this gutted shell would be something new. Something more powerful than a mansion. Something designed to survive the end of the world. Chapter 5. Rebuilding for the Atomic Age. Steel, concrete, and bunkers. The steel skeleton stood complete by summer 1950. Now came the work of making it look like nothing had changed. That was the paradox of this reconstruction. Transform everything structurally while preserving every visual detail. Build a modern fortress disguised as a Georgian mansion. Make it appear that nothing radical had happened at all. The project required meticulous attention to historical accuracy combined with cutting-edge engineering. Workers would install air conditioning systems that didn't exist in Hoban's time. Electrical wiring throughout. Modern plumbing, communications equipment. All hidden behind walls that looked exactly like the originals. Concrete came next. Tons of it. Workers poured concrete floors onto the steel framework. These weren't the wooden floors that had sagged and rotted. These were reinforced slabs designed to carry weight that Hoban never imagined. The floors went in level by level: basement, ground floor, state floor, second floor residence, third floor, each one poured, reinforced, and finished to exact specifications. While concrete work continued above ground, underground construction progressed below. The Presidential Emergency Operations Center took shape deep beneath the East Wing. The original facility built during World War II had been cramped, hastily constructed, barely adequate for Roosevelt's wartime needs. This new installation was different, permanent, substantial, designed to function as a command center during nuclear war. The exact specifications remain classified, but the space included a conference room with communications equipment, secure telephone lines, radio systems, eventually video screens for monitoring situations worldwide, air filtration systems designed to screen out radioactive particles. The entrance system was elaborate. Multiple vault-type doors with biometric locks, secret elevators, access through seemingly ordinary rooms that concealed the path downward. Security measures upon security measures. The shelter was built to withstand a direct nuclear strike. Or at least, that was the goal. The walls were thick concrete, heavily reinforced. The structure was isolated from the building above to prevent collapse transmission. Ventilation posed a particular challenge. The facility needed fresh air, but air intakes could become vectors for radioactive contamination. Engineers designed filtration systems with multiple stages, chemical scrubbers, HEPA filters, blast valves that would seal automatically if sensors detected overpressure from a nuclear detonation. Power systems were redundant. The underground complex had its own generators, fuel storage, battery backup. Communication lines ran through multiple conduits so that cutting one wouldn't sever all contact with the outside world. The PEOC was staffed around the clock. Military personnel from the White House Military Office worked in shifts, 12 hours on, 12 hours off. Every day, every night, forever. Making sure that if the president needed to reach the emergency center in a crisis, someone would be there to receive him. Access required the highest security clearances. Even most White House staff didn't know the full extent of what was being built underground. The capabilities were classified. Even acknowledging its existence was restricted for decades. While construction continued below, restoration work proceeded above. Plasterers recreated the elaborate cornices and ceiling medallions that had been removed. They worked from photographs and from the numbered pieces that had been saved. Each ornamental detail was reproduced exactly. Carpenters rebuilt the wall paneling, the carved mantels, the intricate trim. Some original pieces could be reused. Others had to be remade by craftsmen who studied the originals and matched them precisely. The Blue Room received particular attention. Its elliptical shape made it one of the most distinctive spaces. Workers recreated the curved walls, the elegant proportions. The room that would host countless diplomatic receptions needed to be perfect. The East Room was rebuilt to its full grandeur, the largest room in the White House, the space where presidents held press conferences and formal receptions. Crystal chandeliers were rehung. The parquet floors were relaid. White and gold furnishings were arranged exactly as they had been. The state dining room could seat over 100 guests at formal dinners. The room was recreated with its wood paneling and elaborate plasterwork. Everything looked Georgian. Everything looked historic. But behind the walls ran modern electrical systems, climate control, and communications networks. Upstairs, the private residence took shape. Bedrooms for the first family, guest rooms, the president's study. These rooms were less formal than the state floor, but they still required careful attention to period details. The kitchen was thoroughly modern, stainless steel, commercial-grade equipment, nothing like what existed in Hoban's time. But it was hidden away where visitors wouldn't see the anachronism. Throughout the mansion, modern systems were concealed. Air conditioning ducts ran behind walls. Electrical panels were hidden in closets. The goal was invisibility. Make the 20th century disappear behind an 18th century facade. The work took longer than estimated. Reconstruction projects always do. What was supposed to take 2 years stretched to 3, then almost 4. Costs escalated. The project eventually consumed $5.7 million, a massive sum in 1950. Congress appropriated additional funds reluctantly, but no one wanted to be responsible for the White House falling down, so the money kept flowing. President Truman watched the work from Blair House. He visited the construction site regularly, walked through the gutted structure as steel went in, inspected the concrete pours, examined the restored rooms as they neared completion. He understood what was happening. This wasn't just renovation, this was transformation. The White House was being rebuilt for a new era, an era of nuclear weapons and global superpowers and threats that required underground shelters and filtered air. By early 1952, the work was nearly complete. The exterior looked exactly as it had before: white sandstone walls, porticos, windows in the same positions. Hoban would have recognized the structure instantly from the outside, but inside, everything was different. Steel supported the structure. Concrete formed the floors. Modern systems ran throughout. And deep below, the PEOC waited for a crisis that everyone hoped would never come. The Truman family moved back into the White House in March 1952, 3 years and 3 months after leaving. They walked into rooms that looked familiar but were fundamentally new. The furniture was the same. The artwork was the same. The decorative details were meticulously reproduced, but the mansion itself had been reborn. It was stronger than the original. It was equipped for modern threats. It had been transformed from a residence into a command center. The renovation that began with a piano leg breaking through a floor had ended with the creation of something unprecedented. A historic structure that was actually a modern fortress. A symbol that was also a survival shelter. The White House looked the same, but it had become something Hoban never designed. Something far more powerful than an executive residence. It had become the headquarters of the free world. Built to endure. Built to survive. Built to project power from beneath its elegant Georgian facade. The transformation was complete, and the world had no idea how thoroughly the structure had changed. The steel skeleton would remain hidden behind plaster and paint. The underground complex would stay classified for decades. The public would see a historic mansion, carefully preserved and maintained. They wouldn't know that beneath the familiar exterior stood something entirely new. Something built for a nuclear age. Something designed to survive the worst that could happen. The White House had been reborn, and it was ready for whatever came next. Chapter 6. The President's Bunker. The facility sat empty for years. That's the strange reality of the Presidential Emergency Operations Center. Built at enormous expense, staffed continuously, ready for the worst, and almost never used. Presidents knew it was there. They received briefings on its capabilities. They understood that if nuclear war came, they would be rushed underground through secret passages and sealed behind vault doors. But actually going there? That only happened during genuine crises. And genuine crises, thankfully, were rare. The first real use came before the Truman renovation was even complete. Franklin Roosevelt had ordered construction of the original shelter during World War II. A temporary installation beneath the East Wing. Concrete walls, basic communications equipment, nothing sophisticated. Just a place to survive if German bombers somehow reached Washington. They never did. Roosevelt inspected it once after completion. He never returned. The space sat unused through the remainder of the war. After the Truman reconstruction created the expanded PEOC, it remained mostly theoretical. Presidents conducted business in the Oval Office. They held meetings in the cabinet room. They lived upstairs in the residence. The underground command center was insurance, a worst-case option. The Cold War provided the context that justified the expense. Soviet nuclear weapons existed by 1949. Intercontinental ballistic missiles came later. The threat was real enough. But the warning time would be measured in minutes, maybe hours. Enough time to evacuate underground. The facility was tested regularly. Communications equipment was updated. Drills were conducted. Military personnel assigned to the White House Military Office trained on procedures for rapidly moving the chief executive to safety. But actual use? Almost never. That changed on September 11, 2001. Vice President Dick Cheney was in the West Wing when American Airlines Flight 11 struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center at 8:46 in the morning. Initial reports were confused. An accident. A small plane. Then, United Airlines Flight 175 hit the South Tower at 9:03. This was no accident. America was under attack. At 9:37, American Airlines Flight 77 hit the Pentagon. The nation's military headquarters was burning, and reports indicated another hijacked aircraft was heading toward Washington. Secret Service agents didn't wait for orders. They grabbed Cheney and physically carried him toward the PEOC. The vice president's feet barely touched the ground. First Lady Laura Bush was also evacuated to the secure location. She described the experience in her memoir years later. Secret Service agents hustled her through corridors she'd never seen, through a pair of big steel doors that closed behind her with a loud hiss, forming an airtight seal. She walked along old tile floors with pipes hanging from the ceiling and mechanical equipment visible. Unfinished subterranean hallways underneath the White House, heading for the conference room. The command center came alive that morning. Staff poured in. Communications lines opened to the Pentagon, to NORAD, to air bases scrambling fighters. Video screens showed news coverage of the attacks. Secure phones connected to government officials across the country. Cheney took command. President Bush was aboard Air Force One, airborne over the southeastern United States. The chain of command was secure. The government was functioning, and it was all happening from beneath the White House. The PEOC became the operational center for responding to the attacks. Decisions were made there about grounding all aircraft over American airspace, about scrambling fighter jets, about securing the continuity of government. Photographs released years later by the National Archives showed Cheney and other officials seated around the long conference table. 2 flat-screen televisions on the wall, the presidential seal, phones and communication equipment, concrete walls visible behind. The room looked spare, functional, not comfortable, not designed for extended occupation, just a place to survive and command during a crisis. Cheney remained underground for hours, coordinating the response, receiving updates, making decisions while Bush remained airborne for security. The facility performed exactly as designed. It provided a secure location for continuity of government. It kept key officials safe while allowing them to function. It worked. But Cheney reportedly complained about the communications. The systems were outdated. Connections were unreliable. The complaint was noted. Plans were made for upgrades. Those upgrades would wait until the mysterious construction project of 2010 through 2012. But that's a later chapter. The 9/11 attacks demonstrated why the emergency center existed. Real threat. Real crisis. Real need for a secure command location beneath the most obvious target in America. After that day, presidents took the PEOC more seriously. It received attention, upgrades, additional funding. It was no longer theoretical. The shelter was used again on September 11th itself, when Bush finally returned to Washington that evening. He met with his national security team there, discussed the response, planned the days ahead. Over the following years, the installation saw occasional use during threats and drills. When intelligence indicated potential attacks on Washington, key officials sometimes worked from there. When hurricanes threatened the capital, emergency teams coordinated from the underground complex. It became operational rather than theoretical. Then came May 29, 2020. Protests had erupted across America following the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. By late May, demonstrators had gathered outside the White House. Thousands of people, some peaceful, some violent. Fires burned in nearby buildings. Police clashed with protesters. Donald Trump was moved to the PEOC on the night of May 29th. Secret Service made the decision. The situation was deteriorating. The White House perimeter was threatened. He would be safer underground. Trump reportedly spent only a short time in the secure location. Less than an hour, according to some accounts. The threat never materialized into a direct assault on the White House. Security forces maintained the perimeter. The crisis passed. But news of the visit leaked quickly. Media reported that Trump had been taken underground during the protests. He reportedly was furious about the leak. He demanded investigations into who had provided the information to the press. The incident revealed how politically sensitive such moves had become. Roosevelt had inspected his shelter with no controversy. Cheney's time there on 9/11 was considered appropriate. But Trump being moved underground during domestic protests created different optics. The facility had gone from wartime necessity to crisis management tool to political liability in one administration's experience. Yet it remained, still staffed around the clock, still maintained and upgraded, still ready for whatever crisis might come. The PEOC represented something fundamental about the modern presidency. The job had become too important to risk. The chief executive couldn't be allowed to die or become incapacitated during a crisis. Continuity of government demanded protection, so the command center sat beneath the East Wing, waiting, always waiting, hoping never to be truly needed. But ready if the worst happened, ready to seal its doors and filter its air and keep the presidency functioning even if the world above was ending. That was its purpose. That was why millions had been spent on concrete and steel and ventilation systems. To ensure that whatever happened, the American government would survive, would function, would endure. The installation was insurance against apocalypse, and like all insurance, it worked best when it was never needed. But it was there, always there, beneath the white columns and the elegant porticos, beneath the blue room and the state dining room, beneath the symbol of American democracy, hidden, classified, ready. A reminder that the White House wasn't just a mansion anymore, it was a fortress, a command center, a survival shelter. The transformation that began with Truman's Reconstruction had created something unprecedented. A historic structure that was also a military installation, a home that was also an emergency operations center. And deep beneath the familiar facade, the PEOC waited, patient, permanent, prepared for the crisis that everyone hoped would never come. Chapter 7. The Mysterious 2010 Construction, Building the Modern Fortress. In the spring of 2010, tall wooden fences went up around the west wing of the White House. No announcement, no explanation, just fences blocking the public's view of what was happening behind them. Then the trucks started arriving, heavy equipment, concrete mixers, steel delivery vehicles. A construction project was underway, and the government wasn't talking about it. The official story was simple: infrastructure upgrades, aging utility systems needed replacement, water lines, sewer pipes, electrical conduits, routine maintenance on a building that was nearly 60 years removed from its last major renovation. But the scale of the work told a different story. This was no routine maintenance project. The excavation was massive, deep. Workers were digging far below the surface, removing enormous quantities of earth, pouring concrete by the truckload, installing steel beams thick enough to support a skyscraper. The General Services Administration supervised the work. They insisted it was nothing more than necessary infrastructure replacement. The White House needed updated systems. That was all. Nobody believed them. The project was designed to cost $376 million. That's not what you spend on replacing water pipes. The timeline stretched across 4 years. Completion was projected for 2012 or beyond, and the secrecy was extraordinary. The GSA went to great lengths to keep the work hidden. Not only putting up fences around the excavation site, but ordering subcontractors not to talk to anyone. Trucks arriving at the White House gates were instructed to tape over company information on their vehicles. Workers signed non-disclosure agreements. Security was tight. Anyone asking questions received vague non-answers about infrastructure and utility upgrades. The construction took place during the Obama administration. Barack Obama had taken office in January 2009. By 2010, work was underway on what appeared to be a massive expansion of the underground facilities beneath the West Wing. The timing was significant. 9/11 had occurred 9 years earlier. The PEOC had proven its value during that crisis. But Cheney's complaints about outdated communications had been noted. The facility needed modernization. More importantly, threats had evolved. Terrorism wasn't the only concern anymore. Cyber warfare, electromagnetic pulse attacks, nuclear terrorism. The range of threats facing the presidency had expanded dramatically since the Truman renovation. The White House needed capabilities that hadn't existed in 1950. It needed a command center that could function during extended crises, that could withstand modern weapons, that could keep the government operating even if the city above was compromised. So they dug. Excavation went deep beneath the North Lawn. How deep remains classified. But reports described it as a sprawling, multi-story structure whose underground assembly required truckloads of heavy-duty concrete and steel beams. This wasn't renovation. This was new construction. Creating space that hadn't existed before, expanding the underground complex significantly. Speculation ran wild. Was this a new presidential command center? A massive communications data center? An expanded shelter capable of housing more personnel for longer periods? All of the above, probably. One official stated off the record that the work was security-related construction. That was as much confirmation as anyone got. In 2007, 3 years before the major excavation began, a nondescript white building appeared adjacent to the West Wing. Just showed up one day. Nobody acknowledged it. Nobody explained it. During the George W. Bush administration, this mysterious structure didn't officially exist. Speculation suggested it housed temporary communications equipment or a data center, equipment that would later be moved underground during the 2010 construction project. The white building was visible in photographs from that period. Located on the far right when viewing the West Wing from Pennsylvania Avenue. White walls. No windows. No identifying features. It looked like a shipping container that had been painted and left there permanently. Then, sometime during the West Wing construction project, the white building disappeared. Removed. Gone. Perhaps its equipment had been relocated to the new underground facilities. The construction continued through 2011 and into 2012. The fences remained up, the work continued, and the government maintained its stance that this was all routine infrastructure replacement. By late 2012, the fences came down. The excavation was complete. The North Lawn was restored. Grass grew where construction equipment had sat for years. From the surface, nothing had changed. The West Wing looked exactly as it had before. The Oval Office was in the same location. The building's footprint was unchanged. But underneath was different. Reports from journalists who investigated the project described it as potentially creating a facility similar to the Deep Underground Command Center. A DUCC, a second, more extensive secure location, separate from the original PEOC. The DUCC would be made of thick, unbreakable concrete, strong enough to withstand nuclear radiation, deep enough to survive almost any attack. A true survival shelter rather than just an emergency command post. If such a facility existed, it would represent a quantum leap in White House security capabilities. The PEOC under the East Wing had been built for a different era. This new construction would be designed for 21st century threats. The infrastructure would be state-of-the-art, secure communications systems, satellite uplinks, servers capable of maintaining government operations, environmental controls for extended occupation, medical facilities. Everything needed to keep the presidency functioning for days or weeks underground. But confirmation never came. The government never acknowledged what had actually been built beneath the North Lawn. The official line remained infrastructure upgrades. Then, in May 2018, something interesting happened. A sinkhole opened on the North Lawn of the White House, right where the construction had taken place years earlier. The sinkhole was small, a few feet across, easily repaired. But its location was telling. It opened along the perimeter of where the excavation had occurred 6 years earlier. Was it related to the underground construction? Possibly. Washington sits on soft ground. Massive excavation can cause settling. The sinkhole might have been nothing more than earth adjusting after years of supporting new underground structures. Or it might have revealed something else. The War Zone, a defense news website, reported extensively on the sinkhole. They noted that the location suggested the presence of significant underground facilities that might be far more extensive than the public knew. The sinkhole was quickly filled, the lawn was restored, but the incident provided a reminder that beneath the familiar White House grounds, something had been built, something substantial, something the government preferred to keep quiet. The 2010 through 2012 construction project transformed the White House in ways the public will probably never fully understand. The building that emerged from those 4 years of work looked the same on the surface, but underneath, it had become something more. A command center with capabilities beyond what even the Truman renovation had created. A facility designed for threats that would have seemed like science fiction in 1950. The White House had evolved again, from mansion to bunker to something approaching an underground military installation, all while maintaining the appearance of a historic residence. The fences had come down, the grass had grown back, the building looked unchanged, but beneath the north lawn, something waited. Something powerful, something classified. The transformation that began with enslaved workers laying stone in 1792 had continued. The mansion built by Hoban had survived fire and reconstruction and complete gutting, and now it had been enhanced with facilities that existed only in blueprints locked in classified vaults. The White House remained a symbol, but it had become a fortress, and the fortress kept growing deeper into the earth, hidden, protected, ready. Chapter 8. Secret Tunnels. The Underground Network. The White House doesn't stand alone underground. Beneath the familiar grounds runs a network of passages connecting the executive mansion to other government buildings. Some are acknowledged, others remain classified. All of them serve a purpose. The most documented tunnel runs from the White House to the Treasury building next door. This passage has existed since World War II. Built during the early 1940s as part of the initial wartime security measures. The tunnel was constructed for a specific reason. If air raid sirens sounded, the president needed a way to reach a more secure location without exposing himself on the street. The Treasury building had deep vaults built into granite foundations, far stronger than the White House basement of that era. So they dug a passage, 150 feet long, running from beneath the White House to an open areaway at the Treasury building. The president could walk underground from his residence to reinforced shelter in minutes. The Treasury vaults were converted into temporary living quarters during construction, 10 rooms behind a steel bank door, described as comfortable as a suite at a fine hotel. If attack came before the permanent shelter was ready, this would keep the president safe. The tunnel entrance on the White House side reportedly sits near the Oval Office, a door adjacent to a private restroom. Behind that door, stairs descend to the passage below. The tunnel includes security measures, cameras, alarms, cipher locks. Secret Service guards the passage constantly. It's not a public walkway. It's an emergency escape route and a secure connection between two critical government buildings. From the Treasury building, another tunnel extends to what's now called the Freedmen's Bank building on H Street. This passage was built in 1919, predating the White House connection. Originally constructed to facilitate freight movement and utility access, it became part of the broader tunnel network. The H Street entrance is unmarked, an alleyway with a ram-proof vehicle gate and a bulletproof Secret Service kiosk set into the wall. The narrow enclosed passage leads down the block through 2 tunnels, ending at the Treasury Annex. From there, access continues to the White House. This route has been used for discreet entries and exits. When people need to reach the White House without attracting media attention, they can arrive at the H Street entrance and walk underground to the executive mansion. No cameras, no reporters, complete privacy. The tunnels have served various purposes over the decades. Tricia Nixon and her husband used the Treasury passage to leave the White House after their 1971 Rose Garden wedding. They exited through the underground route to avoid the crowds and press waiting at street level. During the Johnson and Carter administrations, according to longtime White House military office head Bill Gulley, Male staff members allegedly used the tunnel to bring women into the building discreetly. The passage provided access without going through main entrances where guards logged every visitor. President Lyndon Johnson reportedly used the tunnel to avoid Vietnam War protesters when leaving the White House. Rather than face demonstrations at the gates, he could depart through the underground passage and emerge elsewhere. In 1987, during the Reagan administration, another tunnel was constructed, Project ZP. This passage runs from near the Oval Office to a location in the East Wing basement. 150 feet. Accessible through a secret door that opens when a wall panel is pressed. The Reagan Tunnel connects the president's workspace to the emergency facilities under the East Wing, a quick route to the PEOC if crisis strikes. The passage reportedly includes a staircase leading down from the hidden door to a closet near a private elevator. Beyond the documented tunnels, rumors suggest additional passages, connections to the Capitol building, links to the vice president's residence, routes to other federal structures. Most remain unconfirmed. The Capitol rumor persists, but lacks evidence. The distance is substantial, over a mile from the White House to Capitol Hill. Such a tunnel would be an enormous engineering project. Possible but unverified. More plausible are connections to nearby executive office buildings. The Eisenhower Executive Office Building sits adjacent to the White House. A tunnel linking them would make operational sense. Easy movement between the buildings without going outside, but no official confirmation exists. What is certain is that utility tunnels run throughout the area. Water pipes, electrical conduits, steam lines, communications cables. Washington's underground infrastructure is extensive. Some of these utility passages are large enough for people to walk through. During the Capitol riot on January 6, 2021, these tunnel systems proved their value. Members of Congress were evacuated through underground passages to secure locations. Vice President Mike Pence was moved through subterranean routes away from the mob breaching the building. The tunnels allowed rapid evacuation without exposing officials to danger on the streets. The system worked exactly as designed. Keep key government personnel safe, maintain continuity, move people quickly between secure locations. The White House tunnel network represents layers of security built over decades. The World War II Treasury Passage, the Cold War utility tunnels, the Reagan-era presidential escape route, the modern post-9/11 enhancements. Each layer added capability, each expansion increased options for protecting the presidency, and each addition remained largely hidden from public view. Marine One, the presidential helicopter, provides another evacuation option. The aircraft sits on alert at nearby Anacostia. In an emergency, it can reach the White House South Lawn in minutes. The president boards and lifts off, escaping by air rather than underground. But helicopter evacuation has limitations. Bad weather grounds aircraft. Direct attacks could prevent takeoff. Tunnels provide an alternative, a way to move the president when flying isn't possible. The combination creates redundancy, multiple escape routes, various options depending on the threat, above ground, below ground, by air, by underground passage, whatever the situation requires. The tunnels also serve mundane purposes, moving supplies, transporting equipment, allowing staff to travel between buildings during harsh weather. Not everything about the passages is dramatic or classified, but their primary purpose remains security, keeping the president safe, providing escape routes if the White House comes under attack, ensuring that even if the building above is compromised, the presidency can continue functioning from secure locations underground. The exact extent of the tunnel network remains classified. How many passages exist, where they lead, what capabilities they provide. These details stay secret for obvious reasons. Revealing escape routes defeats their purpose. What's known publicly represents only part of the system. The Treasury Tunnel is acknowledged because it's old enough and well documented enough that secrecy became impossible. The H Street entrance exists in plain sight, though few know its purpose, but other passages remain hidden. Entrances concealed behind unmarked doors. Routes known only to Secret Service and military personnel assigned to White House security. The mansion built by Hoban sits atop a network he never imagined. tunnels running in multiple directions, connections to other structures, passages built across decades as threats evolved and security requirements changed. Above ground, the White House looks isolated, a single building behind fences and gates. But below ground, it connects to a broader infrastructure, part of a network designed to keep the government functioning no matter what happens on the streets above. The tunnels are insurance, like the PEOC, like the steel skeleton, like every security measure built into the White House over 2 centuries. They exist because the presidency has become too important to risk, because continuity of government demands multiple options, because threats evolve and security must evolve with them. So the passages wait beneath Washington streets, dark, secure, ready, connecting the White House to the world beyond its walls, hidden infrastructure serving a visible symbol. The transformation from Georgian mansion to command center included these tunnels. They're part of how the building became powerful, part of how it adapted to serve modern needs while maintaining historic appearance. Above ground, tradition; below ground, capability. That's been the pattern for decades, and the tunnels embody that pattern perfectly. Chapter 9. The West Wing and East Wing, Expanding Presidential Power. When John Adams moved into the president's house in 1800, the entire federal executive branch worked inside one building. The president, his secretary, perhaps a clerk or two, that was the staff. They all fit comfortably within Hoban's design. By 1900, that arrangement had become impossible. The presidency had grown. The government had expanded. The executive branch employed hundreds of people who needed workspace, and they were all crammed into a mansion designed for a much smaller operation. Something had to give. Theodore Roosevelt solved the problem in 1902. He commissioned a new structure attached to the west side of the mansion, an office building where presidential staff could work without invading the family's living space. Roosevelt understood that the White House served 2 incompatible functions. It was the president's home, and it was the executive office. His family couldn't live comfortably while staff members occupied every available room for government work. So he separated them physically, built an addition for official business, left the main residence for living and ceremony. The original Western addition was modest, a long, low building with colonial revival styling that matched the main house. It contained offices for the president's secretary, clerks, and other staff members. Simple, functional, nothing grand, but it established a crucial precedent. The White House could expand horizontally. New structures could be added while preserving the historic core. This first edition grew quickly. What started as simple office space became the nerve center of executive power. By 1909, President William Howard Taft had expanded it significantly. He created the first Oval Office, positioning it at the center of the South Side. The oval shape was deliberate. It echoed the Blue Room in the main residence. The curved walls created a more egalitarian meeting space than a rectangular room with a head position. Everyone sitting along the curve was roughly equidistant from the president. Taft's Oval Office faced south, overlooking what would become the Rose Garden. That location didn't last. A fire in 1929 during the Hoover administration damaged the structure significantly. The reconstruction moved the Oval Office to the southeast corner, where it remains today. The expansion continued. Franklin Roosevelt added a matching structure on the eastern side in 1942. Officially, this was wartime necessity. The executive branch needed more office space during World War II. The new addition provided it. But this eastern structure served another purpose. It concealed something beneath. The first PEOC, the wartime shelter built for Roosevelt. The building went up above ground while workers dug below, creating the underground command post. The public saw office space being added. They didn't know about the excavation underneath. Architecture became cover for classified construction, a pattern that would repeat decades later. Both additions changed how the White House functioned. The main residence could return to being primarily a home and ceremonial space. The working presidency moved to these attached structures. especially the Western offices, which became synonymous with executive power. That phrase became shorthand for presidential operations: the Oval Office, the Cabinet Room, the Roosevelt Room where staff meetings occurred, the Situation Room in the basement where national security decisions were made, all of it concentrated in that attached structure. The Western offices are small, surprisingly small given their importance. About 65,000 square feet total, cramped hallways, offices barely larger than closets, senior staff packed into spaces that would be unacceptable in any modern office building. But location matters more than size. Proximity to the president means power. Physical closeness to decision-making matters in ways that video conferences and phone calls can't replicate. The Eastern structure serves different functions. It houses the First Lady's office and staff. The White House social secretary works from there. The visitor entrance and tour operations are managed from that side. Less about policy, more about the White House as institution and symbol. But beneath that Eastern addition sits the PEOC. That gives the structure importance beyond its visible functions. In a crisis, it becomes critical infrastructure, the entrance to survival. Over the decades, both additions have been renovated repeatedly. The Western offices have been rebuilt so many times that almost nothing remains from Theodore Roosevelt's original design. Each president customizes the space slightly, changes offices, updates technology, adapts it to personal working style. The Situation Room was added in 1961 under Kennedy, a secure space in the basement where the president could monitor crises and communicate with military commanders. Small, plain, but connected to intelligence feeds from around the world. That room became iconic. Photographs of presidents meeting with advisors during crises. The long conference table. The screens showing maps and video feeds. The secure phones connecting to command centers globally. Presidential power concentrated in one basement room. The additions also created security perimeters. Fences could be positioned around the expanded complex. The grounds between the main house and the attached structures could be monitored. The changes made the White House easier to defend by defining clear boundaries. From above, the modern White House looks like an H. The main residence forms the crossbar. One addition extends left, another extends right. This configuration emerged over decades of pragmatic expansion. None of it was in Hoban's plan. He designed a single rectangular building, but the presidency outgrew that design, so the structure adapted, expanded, evolved to serve needs that didn't exist in 1792. These additions represent how the White House became more than a mansion. They're physical manifestations of presidential power growing beyond what the founders imagined. Each expansion marked increased complexity in governing, more staff, more functions, more security requirements. Today, the Western offices employ hundreds of people: policy advisors, communications staff, national security personnel, schedulers, everyone working to support the presidency. All of them crammed into that relatively small attachment. The Eastern side is less crowded but equally important. The First Lady has become a significant public figure requiring substantial staff. Social events at the White House require coordination and planning. Tours must be managed. All of that happens on that side of the complex. Together, these additions transform the White House from residence to compound, from house to installation, from mansion to operational center. And beneath it all, especially beneath the Eastern structure, the underground facilities added another dimension. The White House didn't just expand horizontally, it grew downward. Tunnels, shelters, command centers, an entire infrastructure hidden below the visible additions. The attached structures made that possible. They provided cover for excavation. They created logical locations for underground access points. They gave reasons for construction projects that concealed classified work. Theodore Roosevelt probably didn't envision any of this when he commissioned the first modest office attachment. He just wanted workspace separated from family quarters. But that decision started a process that continued for over a century. The White House kept growing, kept adapting, kept expanding to meet new requirements, and the additions became the most visible evidence of that evolution. Above ground, they look like architectural expansions. reasonable additions to a historic structure. Below ground, they anchor something more significant. A network of secure facilities, command infrastructure, the machinery of modern presidential power. The mansion built by enslaved workers in the 1790s could never have handled the requirements of the modern presidency. So it grew, expanded, added structures and underground levels and communication systems and security infrastructure. The result looks elegant from Pennsylvania Avenue, white buildings connected by colonnades, balanced, proportional, historic. But appearances deceive. What looks like a mansion is actually a command complex. What appears to be office additions conceals entrances to underground facilities. What seems like architectural harmony masks a transformation spanning 2 centuries. These structures aren't just buildings, they're evidence. Proof that the White House became something far more powerful than Hoban designed. Something adapted to serve a superpower. Something built to project and protect executive authority. And they're still growing, still evolving. Still being modified as new presidents arrive with new requirements and new threats emerge requiring new capabilities. The transformation continues. The additions expand the footprint, and beneath them, the infrastructure deepens. Chapter 10: Security Evolution, From Open House to Fortress. In 1865, a man walked into the White House carrying a pistol. He wasn't stopped, wasn't questioned, wasn't searched. He simply walked through the front door, climbed the stairs, and entered the president's office. His name was John Wilkes Booth. He was there to deliver a letter. Abraham Lincoln received him briefly, then sent him away. Booth left peacefully. 9 days later, he would assassinate Lincoln at Ford's Theater. But the ease with which he entered that day tells you everything about protection in the 19th century. There wasn't any. The president's house was genuinely public. Citizens could walk in during business hours. They could wander the first floor. They could wait in line to meet the president. No appointments necessary, no background checks, no metal detectors. This wasn't carelessness, it was philosophy. The president served the people. The people's house should be accessible to the people. Democratic principles demanded openness. That openness persisted for decades. Through the 19th century and into the 20th, ordinary Americans could simply walk into the executive mansion. They could tour the state rooms. They could shake hands with the president at public receptions. The grounds were equally open. People strolled across the lawn. Children played near the building. Photographers set up tripods on the property. The resident sat in the middle of a public park that anyone could enter. Protection existed, but it was minimal. A few guards, some police officers nearby. Nothing approaching modern standards. The president was considered relatively safe because attacking him was simply unthinkable to most people. That assumption proved wrong repeatedly. Lincoln assassinated in 1865. James Garfield shot in 1881. William McKinley killed in 1901. 3 presidents murdered in 36 years. The price of accessibility was vulnerability. Each assassination prompted minor increases in protection, more guards, better screening of visitors, restrictions on who could approach directly. But the changes were incremental. The building remained fundamentally open. The Secret Service became responsible for presidential protection after McKinley's death. But even then, safeguards were light by modern standards. The president could still walk Washington streets with minimal escort. The gates stayed open during the day. World War I brought the first significant enhancements. Guards increased in number. Access became more controlled. The war created awareness that the president might be targeted by foreign agents. But the changes were temporary. After the war, restrictions relaxed again. The Great Depression and World War II marked a turning point. The executive mansion began closing off public access. Franklin Roosevelt faced threats from both domestic extremists and foreign enemies. Protection became tighter. The grounds became more restricted. But the real transformation came after World War II. The Cold War changed everything. The Soviet Union had nuclear weapons. The president wasn't just a political leader anymore. He was the commander who could order nuclear strikes. His survival became a matter of national importance. The Truman renovation in the late 1940s included defensive enhancements along with structural improvements. The underground shelter, the reinforced construction. The building was being fortified against threats that previous generations never imagined. Through the 1950s and 60s, protections continued tightening. Fences went up, gates became checkpoints, public tours were restricted. The grounds were increasingly off-limits except for designated areas. The Kennedy assassination in 1963 accelerated the process. If the president could be killed in a motorcade in Dallas, then the mansion needed to become more secure. Protection became paramount. Pennsylvania Avenue in front remained open to vehicle traffic through most of the 20th century. Cars could drive directly past the north fence. That changed in 1995 after the Oklahoma City bombing. The Secret Service closed Pennsylvania Avenue permanently. No vehicles. The street became a pedestrian plaza. The closure transformed the perimeter. Without traffic, the approach became more controllable. Barriers could be positioned. Sight lines improved. The building became more defensible. September 11, 2001, brought another wave of changes. Bollards went up around the entire complex. Heavy concrete barriers designed to stop truck bombs. Jersey barriers appeared on surrounding streets. The defensive perimeter expanded outward. Visitor access became heavily restricted. Tours required advanced background checks, months of waiting, multiple layers of screening. What had once been a casual visit became a complicated process requiring planning and clearance. The fence itself was raised in 2014, from 6 feet to 13 feet. Taller, harder to climb, more intimidating. The change made the building look more like a fortress and less like a residence. Additional barriers were added in 2015. Removable bollards that could be raised to block vehicles. More screening equipment at entry points. Expanded camera coverage. Every approach was monitored and controlled. The contrast with earlier eras is stark. In 1865, Booth walked in carrying a pistol. In 2020, visitors undergo screening more intensive than airports. Metal detectors, X-ray machines, background checks. Armed guards at every entrance. The grounds have become completely inaccessible except for official tours. The public can view the mansion from outside the fence, but they cannot approach closely. They cannot walk the lawn. They cannot experience the building as citizens once did. Even the airspace is restricted. Flying over is prohibited. Surface-to-air missiles are positioned nearby to enforce the restriction. Any aircraft entering the airspace risks being shot down. The protection extends upward as well as outward. Snipers position on the roof. Counter-assault teams stand ready. Surveillance systems monitor every approach. The apparatus surrounding the residence employs hundreds of personnel and costs millions annually. The Secret Service maintains a perimeter extending several blocks in every direction. Buildings within that zone face restrictions. Certain activities are prohibited. Parking is limited. Every vehicle entering the area is tracked. The transformation from open house to fortress happened gradually. Each threat prompted new measures. Each failure led to tighter controls. The cumulative effect has been complete lockdown. What was once the most accessible symbol of democracy has become one of the most protected buildings on Earth. The evolution reflects changing threats. Terrorism, assassination attempts, mass shootings, drone attacks. Each new danger requires new defenses. But the evolution also reflects something else. The presidency has become too important to risk. The commander who controls nuclear weapons, the leader of the global superpower, the person whose death could destabilize markets and governments worldwide. That person cannot be vulnerable, cannot be exposed, cannot be allowed to die from preventable failures. So the defenses keep increasing, the barriers keep going up, the perimeter keeps expanding. The structure looks the same from a distance. White columns, familiar facade, historic architecture. But try to approach it. Try to get close. You'll encounter barriers, guards, checkpoints, multiple layers preventing access. The building has become a fortress hidden behind the appearance of a mansion. The defenses are designed to be invisible from afar while being impenetrable up close. Make it look approachable. Make it actually unreachable. This is part of how the residence became powerful. not just through steel and concrete and underground shelters, but through layers of protection that transformed it from public building to defended installation. The accessibility that defined it for the first 100 years is gone. The openness that let citizens walk through the front door has vanished. What remains is defense. Barriers between the presidency and the public. Some see this as necessary evolution. The world is dangerous. The president must be protected. Modern threats demand these measures. Others see it as loss. The people's house has become inaccessible to the people. The symbol of democracy is surrounded by fortress walls. Something fundamental has changed. Both perspectives are true. The structure had to become a fortress to survive modern threats. But in becoming a fortress, it lost something essential, the accessibility that once made it genuinely democratic. The transformation continues. Technology improves. New threats emerge. The defenses adapt. And the barriers between the presidency and the public grow higher and stronger with each passing year. What began as an open mansion has become an impenetrable compound. The evolution from accessible to fortress took 150 years, but it's complete now. The transformation is total. The building project's power not just through its historic architecture, but through its inaccessibility, through barriers and guards and surveillance systems that declare, this structure is untouchable, this presidency is protected, this power is defended. Chapter 11. The White House Today. Modern Command Center. The building at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue looks the same as it did in 1800. White sandstone walls, neoclassical columns, elegant proportions. Hoban would recognize it instantly. From the outside, his design endures unchanged. But that's an illusion, a carefully maintained fiction. The structure that stands today bears almost no resemblance to what Hoban built. The walls are original. Everything else is different. Inside those 18th century walls stands a 20th century steel skeleton. Beneath the historic facade runs 21st century technology. Under the familiar grounds extends an underground network that would astonish the architects who designed the surface. The modern executive mansion contains 132 rooms, 5 floors including 2 basement levels, 6 levels of living space, 35 bathrooms, 28 fireplaces, 3 elevators, 8 staircases. But those statistics don't capture what it actually is. They describe a house. This is something more. The Situation Room operates constantly in the basement. Secure communications reach every corner of the globe. Intelligence feeds arrive from satellites and stations worldwide. The president can monitor situations and issue commands without leaving the building. The PEOC sits ready beneath the East Wing. Staffed 24 hours a day, every day, forever. Military personnel rotate through 12-hour shifts, ensuring that if crisis strikes, the command center activates immediately. The underground network extends beyond what's publicly acknowledged. Tunnels connect to nearby structures. Secure passages provide escape routes. The full extent remains classified, but the system is substantial. Above ground, the residence portion occupies the 2nd and 3rd floors. The first family lives there. Private quarters away from the public spaces below. Bedrooms, sitting rooms, a kitchen, living spaces that approximate normalcy despite the building's other functions. But even the residence contains capabilities that didn't exist decades ago. Secure communications, protected areas, technology embedded throughout. The private floors aren't just living space. They're part of the broader security infrastructure. The state floor hosts diplomatic functions and official events. The East Room, the Blue Room, the Red Room, the Green Room, the State Dining Room. These spaces look historic. Visitors see period furniture and classic decor. What they don't see is the technology hidden behind walls and beneath floors. Climate control systems maintain perfect conditions for historic artifacts. Security systems monitor every room constantly. Communications infrastructure connects these ceremonial spaces to command functions elsewhere in the complex. The state rooms serve dual purposes: public diplomacy, private capability. The ground floor contains working spaces: the map room, the library, the diplomatic reception room, offices for various staff functions. This level bridges ceremony and operation, public enough for events, functional enough for daily work. The basement levels house critical infrastructure. The Situation Room, communications centers, security operations, maintenance facilities, and the classified spaces that connect to deeper levels below. How deep those levels go remains secret. The PEOC is acknowledged. The tunnel system is partially known, but the full vertical extent of the complex stays classified. Multiple stories underground, perhaps more than publicly admitted. The West Wing operates as the nerve center of executive power. The Oval Office sits at the heart of it. The president works there daily when in Washington. Meetings, briefings, decisions, all happening in that famous Oval Room. The Cabinet Room adjoins the Oval Office. The Situation Room sits below in the basement. The Roosevelt Room handles staff meetings. Press operations work from the building's western end. Everything concentrates in this relatively small structure attached to the main residence. The West Wing employs hundreds. Policy advisors, communication staff, national security personnel, speechwriters, schedulers, political strategists, all working in cramped offices to support the presidency. The East Wing manages different functions: the First Lady's office and staff, social operations, tour coordination, the visitor entrance. This side handles the ceremonial and public-facing aspects of the institution, but beneath sits the PEOC, that gives the Eastern structure critical importance beyond its visible roles. In an emergency, this becomes the entrance to survival, the path to the command center that keeps government functioning when the surface world fails. The grounds have become completely controlled space, every inch monitored, every person tracked. The 18 acres surrounding the buildings constitute one of the most secured properties on Earth. The Rose Garden on the south side hosts occasional events, press conferences, state ceremonies, small gatherings on the lawn. But even these public moments occur within layers of protection. Snipers on the roof, agents nearby, surveillance covering every angle. The perimeter fence stands 13 feet high, cameras watch every approach, bollards prevent vehicle attacks, guards patrol constantly. The entire complex exists in a state of permanent defensive readiness. The airspace above is restricted. Flying over means getting shot down. The ground beneath contains classified facilities. The structure itself can function as a bunker if needed. Protection extends in all three dimensions. Communication systems connect the building to military command centers worldwide, to NORAD in Colorado, to Strategic Command in Nebraska, to carrier groups at sea, to embassies globally. The president can reach any military asset or diplomatic post instantly from multiple locations within the complex. The technology embedded throughout would be incomprehensible to anyone from earlier eras. Secure networks, encrypted communications, biometric access controls, systems monitoring everything from air quality to radiation levels to unauthorized electronic emissions. The building can seal itself. Air filtration systems activate. Blast doors close. The structure transforms from mansion to bunker. How quickly this happens and what it can withstand remains classified, but the capability exists. This is what 230 years of evolution created. A Georgian mansion facade containing a modern command center. Historic architecture concealing contemporary power projection capabilities. The transformation from Hoban's design to today's reality happened gradually. Each generation added layers. Each crisis prompted enhancements. Each technological advance enabled new capabilities. The cumulative result is a building unlike any other. It serves as residence, as office complex, as ceremonial space, as command center, as survival shelter, as communications hub, as symbol, all simultaneously, all within one structure that maintains the appearance of historic preservation. The public sees what they expect to see: white columns, familiar facade, the building from textbooks and photographs. What they don't see is everything else: the steel skeleton, the underground levels, the technology, the infrastructure, the capabilities. The White House projects power through this duality: historic on the surface, advanced beneath, traditional in appearance, modern in function. It looks like the past while operating firmly in the present. That's the ultimate achievement of its transformation. Maintaining continuity while changing completely. Looking the same while becoming entirely different. Preserving symbol while building capability. The mansion built by enslaved workers in 1792 has become the command center of the world's most powerful nation. The structure burned by British soldiers has become impervious to attack. The building that nearly collapsed from neglect has become one of the strongest on Earth. Every crisis added strength. Every threat prompted evolution. Every generation contributed to the transformation. The result stands today at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. White walls gleaming in the sun, columns supporting a familiar pediment, architecture unchanged for centuries, all of it concealing what the building actually is, not a mansion, a fortress, not a residence, a command center, not a symbol, a weapon, or perhaps all of these things at once. The building contains multitudes. It is what 230 years of American power created. What fire and reconstruction and gutting and expansion and fortification built. What threats foreign and domestic demanded. What technology enabled. What necessity required. The White House became America's most powerful mansion by ceasing to be merely a mansion. By becoming something unprecedented. By transforming while appearing unchanged. By hiding capability behind tradition. That transformation is complete, but it continues. New threats emerge. Technology advances. Requirements evolve. And the building adapts, slowly, carefully, always maintaining its appearance while changing its reality. The structure Hoban designed no longer exists except as facade. What stands in its place is something he never imagined. Something powerful enough to survive whatever comes. Something built to endure. Something designed to project and protect American executive authority for centuries to come. The transformation from Georgian mansion to modern command center took 230 years. It's not finished. It will never be finished. The building keeps evolving, keeps adapting, keeps becoming more capable while looking the same. That's how the White House became America's most powerful mansion. Not by staying the same, by changing everything while appearing to change nothing, by becoming something entirely new while preserving the image of what it was. The illusion is perfect, the reality is extraordinary, and the building stands ready for whatever the future brings. 230 years separate the laying of the first cornerstone from the building that stands today. In that time, enslaved workers built walls from Aquia Creek sandstone. British soldiers burned those walls to charred shells. Hoban rebuilt them and painted them white. Truman gutted them and installed a steel skeleton inside. Every generation transformed the structure while preserving its appearance. The White House you see is both ancient and modern, historic and contemporary, mansion and fortress, all at once. It rose from the hands of people who would never be free. It survived fire meant to destroy it. It was rebuilt stronger after every crisis. It evolved to meet threats that didn't exist when Hoban put pen to paper. The building became powerful not despite its transformations, but because of them. Each change added capability. Each reconstruction increased strength. Each addition expanded function. What started as a simple executive residence became the command center of a superpower. What began as an open public building became an impenetrable fortress. What was once just a house became something unprecedented in history. The transformation continues. New threats will emerge. Technology will advance, and the building will adapt again, always changing, never appearing to change, maintaining the illusion while altering the reality. That's the story of how the White House became America's most powerful mansion. Through fire, through reconstruction, through underground expansion, through layers of security, through 2 centuries of continuous evolution hidden behind a carefully preserved facade. The building stands ready, for whatever comes next, for however the threats evolve, for whatever the future demands. White walls gleaming, columns standing firm, power hidden beneath tradition. The transformation complete but never finished. This is the White House. This is how it became what it is. This is America's most powerful mansion.